Doctor, thanks for your time. We're talking about genetic testing for cancer, and the first question is, what is genetic or gene testing?
Gene testing looks deep within the molecular structure of our cells to see if there is a particular pattern that's been identified to either produce a higher risk of cancer or in some cases with a cancer diagnosis to help us determine prognosis.
What is the relationship between our genes and cancer?
The relationship is very complex, and we have just scratched the surface on getting a good understanding. Some genes are there to suppress development of cancers, and so if they mutate, then that suppressive effect is lost. Other genes are promoter genes, and they, when activated, tend to cause overgrowth of cells and stimulate the development of cancer in that way.
How are abnormal or improperly functioning genes with respect to cancer identified?
Well, they're identified through blood tests or sometimes tests on the cancer cells themselves. There are several different ways that these genes are acquired, if you will. Some are inherited from your parents and may be in a dormant expression for your entire life, or may be discovered with a cancer very young in life. Those genetic abnormalities then would be found in every cell in your body if it is something you inherited from one of your parents or from both of your parents. The majority of genetic abnormalities in cancer are acquired. That means that you were born with presumably just a fine set of genes, but through either smoking or environmental toxins, maybe radiation from radon gas, you acquire defects over time that your body fails to repair. Our cells have really meticulous repair mechanisms, but they can be overwhelmed and allow these abnormal genes to function.
How accurate or effective is genetic testing as a predictor of cancer?
Boy, that's a loaded question and depends on who you ask. The genetic testing is very precise, but we only know what we know. So you may have a family history that is so clearly likely to show a genetic abnormality predisposing, say, to breast cancer, that every woman has breast cancer in that family. Yet we do all the genetic testing and look for all the mutations that we know to look for, and we don't find any. So that family may have a unique mutation just to them, or that family may have one that's so rare that it's not in our library yet. So we find that genetic testing is very accurate, but family history is also almost as accurate.
What types of cancer susceptibility can be identified using genetic testing?
Breast cancer is the one that's in the news the most, it's linked with ovarian cancer very, very strongly, but also with prostate cancer in men and possibly with other cancers to a lesser degree. There are also genes that we look for in young people that are associated with development of colon cancer. For example, in the familial adenomatous polyp syndrome, you can determine whether you need to start screening teenagers based on their genetic makeup. So it's very reassuring if you have the test and you are not affected, and it's reassuring but scary if you're found to have the genetic mutation. It does not guarantee that you're going to get a cancer, but it increases your risks hugely.
That may segue into our next question. Who should have genetic cancer testing done?
Well, it's very dependent on your family history and your personal history. And there are so many guidelines, and it really depends on what you're looking for. If you're worried the most about breast cancer because of the family history, there are plenty of models that can be used to determine whether you are at a high enough risk to take the genetic test and to deal with the results. As you can imagine, being shown to have one of these genetic abnormalities is hugely anxiety-provoking. And this is one test where there has to be a lot of counseling before the test is done to make sure that the person is able to handle the results.
How is genetic testing for cancer performed?
By blood testing in terms of determining a cancer risk.
Mm-hmm.
So just a sample of blood. All cells in the body have the same genetic makeup unless it is a genetic test being used on a known cancer to determine prognosis. So we just take a blood test. The white cells are grown from your blood, and then they are processed to show the genetic detail.
What does the future hold for gene testing as a tool for diagnosing cancer?
Gene testing is only going to show predisposition. Mm-hmm. There's such a multiple step process by which cancers develop that you have to have probably the right genetic makeup. You may even have to acquire the defects in the right order or with the proper time interval. And you may have to have certain environmental exposures. You may not be a smoker, but maybe you had secondary smoke. Maybe you were exposed to asbestos years before. Or maybe it's one of those where we don't know what the environmental stimulus is and it's just bad luck. Mm-hmm. And so genetic testing right now is only going to show a predisposition in cancer.
Kind of a bonus question here. Are there ethical issues attendant to genetic testing?
The ethical issues are huge, although there are protection against discrimination based on genetic testing results. Everyone who has a genetic abnormality identified is afraid that they won't be able to buy insurance or not to buy insurance at a reasonable cost. They're afraid that they may not get employed if there is a candidate vying for the same job who has normal genes and is equally qualified. Then that employer might anticipate lower health care costs for the genetically normal employee. So there are many, many areas where discrimination is of concern. There are protections. People are not supposed to be discriminated against by having an identified genetic defect.
Very well. Doctor, thank you for your time.
You bet.